Hello, welcome to tonight's event organized by Contemporary Turkish Studies at LSE. My name is Yaprak Gürsoy. I'm Professor of European Politics and the Chair in Contemporary Turkish Studies at LSE. Before we start, let me quickly note that this event is being recorded. As long as we do not encounter any technical difficulties, we will make it available as a podcast and a YouTube video later. Tonight, we are going to discuss what's been happening in Türkiye over the past year. For those of us who follow the news closely, 2025 feels like a turning point in many ways. We were glued to our screens watching the mobilization and rallies organized by the main opposition party, the CHP, after Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu was arrested on corruption charges in March. We've been following the Kurdish terrorist organization, the PKK's decision to lay down arms, and when they symbolically burnt their weapons in July. We have also been following the work of the National Solidarity, Brotherhood and Democracy Commission in the Turkish National Assembly, hoping that this time we'll see permanent peace. Other big moments this year included President Erdogan's visit to the US and his meeting with President Trump at the White House in September, Turkey's role in the Middle East, and negotiations on the war in Gaza in October. And of course, the economy, I think it was a continuous issue throughout the year, and everyone's been watching the key indicators closely as the cost of living crisis has hit every household. None of these developments is new for anyone interested in Turkish politics and the economy. But what we wanted to do in this panel is review the year beyond the headlines from an academic and historical perspective. Because honestly, it feels like every year over the past decade has been described as some turning point. Whether it is global events like the COVID pandemic or domestic ones like regular developments like elections, or even sometimes sudden and unexpected experiences like the July 15th coup in 2016 or the Kahramanmaraş earthquake in February 2023. All of these were turning points to a certain extent. So we wanted to ask ourselves in this panel, to what extent do this year's events represent genuine ruptures or just a continuation of deeper historical and structural patterns? If we take a longer view of Turkish political culture, society, economy, and institutions, what are the most resilient aspects of Turkish politics? And what will these tell us about the future? We have 4 excellent speakers for this task. They will be able to engage with these questions from their specific areas of expertise. And thanks to online technology, they're joining us in a very, very busy period of time in December at the end of the year, and from different corners of Europe, including London, Prague, Madrid, and Ankara. So welcome to our speakers and also welcome to our audience, wherever you are and wherever you are joining us today. Let me introduce the speakers in the order that they will speak. Our first speaker will be Buğra Süster, who's an associate professor in international relations at the University College London, UCL, and head of the Türkiye and the World Program at LSE IDS. Buğra's research expertise includes foreign policy analysis and emerging powers, and in his intervention as the first speaker, he's going to address Turkish foreign policy, international relations, and relations with the West. Our second speaker will be Esra Çuhadar, who is an associate professor at Bilkent University, Ankara, and head of research at Akova Dialogue. In 2023, Esra was a senior advisor with the U.S. standby team, and she also took on different roles at the U.S. Institute of Peace and as a regional mediator for the World Bank. Recently, Esra has worked with the Turkish Parliamentary Commission, and she will tell us about the development in the Commission's work and the peace process. Our third speaker will be Pelin Ayalnasır. She's an associate professor of political science at Federal University and Anglo-American University in Prague. Her research interests include democratization, political parties and their systems, and social movements, with a focus on contemporary Turkey and the Middle East. Today, Pelin will walk us through the key changes and the changes that the Republican People's Party, the CHP, currently Turkey's main opposition and oldest party, has gone through or not gone through in 2025. Our fourth and final speaker will be Işık Özel. Işık is an associate professor at political science at the Department of Social Sciences at Universidad Carlos III de Madrid. She has widely published on Turkish political economy in comparative perspective, and today she will review the most significant aspects of Turkish political economy, continuation, structural and historical dynamics in the past year. After around 45 to 50 minutes of initial introductions, we will open the floor for questions. You can ask your questions to the speakers by using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. I will read out as many questions as possible after the initial round of interventions. So when you pose your questions, please also let us know your name and affiliation. And now I'm delighted to hand over to our first speaker, Bora, for his talk.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me. So I'll give a brief overview of Turkish foreign policies, focusing specifically on relations with the West. So this year, there have been several significant developments in Turkey's relations with the West. My argument, however, is that the broader trajectory remains one of continuity rather than a major change. We do see cooperation between Turkey and the West, but it remains largely issue-specific and transactional. These forms of engagement don't necessarily translate into Turkey's firm integration in long-term frameworks or inclusion in European strategic conversations. The broader trend is often described in terms of weakening normative bonds between Turkey and its European allies and the rise of transactionalism in the relationship. But even a transactional relationship requires a certain degree of trust to sustain a stable partnership. And this is where today's relationship encounters challenges. At present, trust towards Turkey is constrained, stemming from various factors, including Ankara's ongoing relationship with Russia and persistent concerns over democratic backsliding and the rule of law, which create uncertainty and unpredictability about domestic governance in Turkey and foreign policy direction as well. At the same time, there is variation among Western partners in how they approach cooperation with Turkey. Some European countries, governments, for example, they have recently signaled greater openness to defense industrial collaboration, while others still remain hesitant. But this variation shows that cooperation can advance, especially in specific areas, when interests converge. Still, the broader pattern is that Western partners are willing to work with Turkey in strategic issue areas, so like certain defense partnerships, migration, but remain cautious when it comes to long-term arrangements or deeper institutional integration. So a clear example of this dynamic is the debate around Turkey's potential inclusion in the EU's SAFE mechanism, which is an EU-level long-term plan for defense procurement and capacity building, with limited scope for non-EU participation in joint projects. So Ankara sought to become a part of this mechanism, and there was vocal support for Turkey's participation from some members, particularly from Germany. However, ultimately, Turkey did not secure an arrangement before the initial planning window. Political objections inside the EU and reportedly including veto intentions from Greece and Cyprus. Reluctance from France seem to have contributed to the outcome. So while there may still be scope for limited participation into or through bilateral projects, the structural limitations or structural challenges regarding Turkey's integration into emerging European defense architecture persists. At the same time, the US is recalibrating its global posture. Europe is rethinking its role, security and defense. And Turkey is sidelining from these long-term strategic debates. I think it raises questions about where Turkey stands in Europe's emerging security architecture and long-term plans that Europe have. It also suggests that apparent diplomatic openings with several EU member states in the past year have not really made much of a change in when it comes to deeper structural challenges of Turkey-EU relationship. So meanwhile, the EU membership process is de facto not moving forward, and most interactions are taking place outside the membership framework. The EU's recent counter report on Turkey highlights persistent concerns related to democratic backsliding, and key questions remain, including whether the customs union can be modernized. So these continuities are not limited to Turkey's relationship with Europe, and we see similar patterns in Ankara's relationship with the US. So selective cooperation, moments of diplomatic engagement, but still obstacles that prevent a deeper reset in the relationship. So Erdogan's Washington visit earlier this year signaled a push to build momentum and opened window for renewed defense dialogue. However, core issues remain unsolved. So with regard to Turkey's possession of Russian S-400 air defense system and Turkey's exclusion from the F-35 program. Relations with the US are also shaped by diverging approaches to the Israel-Hamas war. Erdogan has positioned Turkey as one of the major critics of Israel's war in Gaza, and recent statements by Turkish officials suggest that Turkey supports the plan to end the Gaza conflict and publicly stated readiness to play a role in the International Stabilization Force, the force that was stipulated by the UN Security Council resolution. However, there are reports of Israel's objections to Turkish involvement. So there is a question of, what role Turkey can realistically play in ceasefire implementation and peace building in Gaza. This year has also seen renewed momentum within NATO to strengthen capabilities. There's a clear security rationale for this, and in specific issue areas like the Black Sea. NATO Secretary General recently warned that Russia could be ready to use military action against NATO members within 5 years, noting that we are all on the eastern flank. So I think in that context, the Black Sea emerges as a focal point for security and connectivity. It's a lifeline for global food security, as we have seen in the grain crisis. It's an important corridor for energy connectivity, and it's a crucial region for managing the spillover effects of the war. And I think Turkey can play an important role here, contributing to the functioning of a Black Sea security and connectivity order, and through reinforcing cooperative mechanisms here. And it already plays important roles. So the Montreux enforcement has been crucial for preventing further escalation in the region. And it has taken on a leading role in unilateral cooperation among littoral states. So a good example of this is the Mine Countermeasures Task Force that Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania set up in Istanbul in July 2024. It's a form of Montreux-compliant maritime security cooperation among NATO littoral states, for neutralizing drifting naval mines in the Black Sea. So such minilaterals can complement NATO's strategic priorities, and their scope can be expanded to include other areas of mutual concern, such as the protection of critical underwater infrastructure. They can also contribute to the EU's priorities, cross-regional connectivity agenda, to enhance security and stability in the Black Sea region. Energy is another domain where continuity is evident. There is considerable degree of energy dependency on Russia, including natural gas and nuclear sector. Reducing this dependency and diversifying energy sources seem to be on the government's agenda, but there has not been a major shift currently. And Ankara recently extended a contract with Gazprom for another year, while publicly signaling a longer-term aim to diversify supplies. More broadly, in terms of Turkey's diplomatic strategy, it has sought to position itself as a mediator in international conflicts, most visibly in the Russia-Ukraine war, with the grain deal, the facilitation of the prisoner exchange. And it's an attractive strategy for Turkey as it seeks a balancing policy between Russia and the West, seeks to generate influence through bridge building. There are also reasons to do with economic stability and domestic concerns. It's a part of the official narrative, a part of this century of Türkiye narrative, with a dedicated department in Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Overall, at the same time, despite Ankara's outreach to non-Western blocs, ties with NATO and EU, they remain central, I think, in Turkish foreign policy agenda. And just to conclude very briefly, I think there is potential for Turkey to play a meaningful role in European security and NATO's deterrence posture in NATO's eastern and southern flanks. But despite diplomatic momentum, recent developments, deeper structural challenges persist. Cooperation with the West continues to take a more transactional, more narrowly framed form. Continuity and selective engagement remain the defining features of the relationship rather than a deep transformation. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Let me first check my voice because I heard that in my initial introductions there was a problem with my connection. Can you hear me fine now? Yeah, okay. I switched headsets and microphone. Apologies for that. My introduction wasn't that important, but if you want to learn more about the biography of the speakers, please do look at our website where there's a short bio, and of course you can find bios of the speakers online as well in their institutions. So apologies for that, and Burra, thank you very much for this very comprehensive overview of relations, Turkey's relations with other countries in 2025. So now we will turn to Esra and her intervention.
Thank you so much, Yaprak, and thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar today. Yaprak asked me to talk about the current peace process in Turkey, and that's what I'm going to focus on. I've been working on peace processes comparatively, actually, mostly. Most of my research has been on inclusive peace processes, examining around 40 peace processes around the world. So most of my reflections on the peace process, the current peace process in Turkey, are also, some reflections that are fed by my comparative experience, comparative studies in this field. So the current peace process in Turkey started about in October 2024. with the public signaling of it by first Devlet Bahçeli, the MHP leader. And this has not been the first sort of peace process. There has been 4 or 5 other attempts in the past. So in that sense, it was not the first one. But compared to the previous peace processes or attempts, let's say, this has been the one that has, it has gone this far. This is the only process that has moved to this stage, and it actually became quite serious. And it is actually perhaps one of the fastest changing tracks or issues in the country's agenda today. Especially, one taboo after another breaking as we go along in this process. The previous peace process was between 2013 and 2015, which failed and which kind of left a very bitter taste for most people in the country. So both the political elite and also the public opinion, the public in general. So everybody was very cautious in the beginning, especially with regards to how far this process will go. But as I said, it went it went in directions that we haven't really thought or foreseen easily about a year ago. All right, so let me start a little bit talking about what are the expectations, perhaps, from the current peace process. It's not an easy question to answer because there's not one expectation, and different sectors do not necessarily agree on expectations from the peace process. So let me open that up a little bit. Most of the public opinion polls indicate that there is actually strong support for a peace process. It ranges usually between 60% to 70%, depending on which poll you look at. And people say that, yes, we should have peace. They support this peace process. And this mostly reflects this collective sentiment of we've had enough with this, right? We want the violence to stop. We want peace. We don't want any more violence, basically. But then the other thing is the public opinion polls also ask whether people have confidence or trust in the peace process in terms of its success, whether it will succeed or not. And then when the question is asked this way, trust or confidence is around 30 to 35%. So there is a big gap in terms of what people want and what they think can happen, what they think can be achieved. So there is a big, actually, confidence gap. This is one of the issues that have been being discussed in the country. There is also a gap between the perceptions of the political elite and the public opinion. So, as I said, I mean, there is a big consensus, or I mean, there's really a significant consensus around the fact that everybody wants an end to the armed conflict. Everybody wants negative peace, in other words, what we call as negative peace, right? But when it comes to what will be the end goal after that, there are very different expectations and views. So, and these different views and expectations can be seen in different issue areas or topics. One of the first important ones is the DDR process, right? What we call as the DDR process, the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration process involving the PKK. So right now, one of the most important steps in the process was the establishment of this commission that you also mentioned, Yaprak, in your introduction, within the parliament in July. This is actually the first of its kind. It was established within the parliament as a special commission with 51 members, 51 parliamentarians, MPs joining the commission. And except one party, E-Party, who refused to join, all other political parties are participating. Including the CHP, so there's wide representation from the opposition, and there's also, of course, representation from the government, AK Party, AKP, and also the MHP, the coalition partner. In terms of the DDR process, what the parties are expecting, at the moment, the Commission is working on drafting a legal document, or drafting the basis of what would be a legal framework that will arrange or regulate the return, and who will return, what will happen to those who return, under what conditions actually this return will take place of the ex-combatants, I mean. So this is the current discussion. And this week, actually, different political parties are presenting their proposals to the Commission. And after these proposals are negotiated at the Commission, they will reach some sort of agreement, some sort of understanding about this law. Now, the biggest divide, perhaps in terms of expectations, is that if you look at actually the parliamentarians and what they say, the AK Party, the AKP, and MHP focus more on the DDR process, or trying to limit the process to mostly DDR. Whereas when you look at CHP and DEM Party, TIP, etc., opposition and left-leaning parties, let's say, this is not really seen as adequate, and that there is a very also strong emphasis on that this process, the DDR process, should go hand in hand with the comprehensive democratization process. So this actually represents two different approaches to conflict, what we call in the literature as conflict management approach versus a more conflict transformation approach, right? The conflict transformation approach highlighting the need to address also the root causes of the conflict, and then conflict management approach focusing more on just ending the violence and managing violence. How about so this is pretty much what the parties are in terms of political parties. When it comes to the expectations of the societal groups, again, I already mentioned the public opinion polls, but when you actually look at the hearings within the commission, as I said, everybody again wants to see negative peace, an end to the violence. But beyond that, there are differences in terms of in terms of, for example, transitional justice expectations, in terms of governance and democratization reforms, the extent of these reforms, in terms of what kind of reparations, or what kind of what should be offered to the victims, for example. There are different expectations in this aspect. Okay, so let me just conclude by saying that the extent, everyone pretty much agrees on the necessity of further democratization steps, but in terms of the extent and content of these democratic reforms, there is not much consensus yet. One side sort of sees this peace process as a societal healing process, versus other actors seeing it as the armed group basically leaving arms, disarming itself and dissolving itself. The other as I said, the other key issue or the key challenge is how to increase the public buy-in for the process. This has been one of the most challenging aspects. So far, the commission has been set up as an inclusive body with the participation of opposition, also women, various different societal groups were listened and heard, including victims and civil society organizations, human rights organizations, so on and so forth. So in that sense, the process has been inclusive, but we're not really, we're going to see actually to what extent this inclusive process is going to lead to some inclusive outcomes. The other maybe another vulnerability, let me just maybe, if you give me one more minute, let me just talk about vulnerabilities. So one vulnerability in the process is that what is it like what AKP and MHP argues: first security, disarmament, then democratization, versus that the other sort of actors arguing that they should go hand in hand. This is actually one thing. As I said, the content of democratization reforms. The other actually sort of divide is around identity-based cultural rights, language, etc., local government reform, so on and so forth. And CHP constantly highlighting the issue of freedom of speech, removing the restrictions on political competition, the appointed trustees, etc. So there is also one last sort of difference in terms of the Syria aspect of the situation, which is another key issue and also a vulnerability at the same time. Some actors arguing that this disarmament of the PKK should go hand in hand with the disarmament of other armed groups in Syria, especially the SDF, and others saying that no, these two processes should be disentangled and should be treated separately. So I will stop at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esra. Again, a very comprehensive overview of everything that has happened in 2025, and I'm sure we'll continue to discuss more about this issue in the Q&A portion of the panel. Now, over to Pelin to talk about the opposition party and the changes that may or may not be happening.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Yaprak, for your introduction. I have a PowerPoint presentation to share. So I would like to share my screen. I hope that it will work. So I hope that you see it.
Yes, we can see it.
I will enlarge it as well. I don't know. Okay.
Yes, perfect now. Thanks.
So I will mainly focus on the CHP and how it is transforming, or whether it is transforming as a result of Istanbul mayor's arrest on 19th of March. And of course, my main point is actually that there is also a structural continuity beneath what we see as the transformation of the party. So I would like to mainly focus on, we see a change in the CHP toward a transformation toward a movement party since March 19. But at the same time, this change has not really turned into a smooth shift. So why could this be the case? Why this change toward a movement party is not happening that smoothly? Second question related to the first one is, why has it started now but not earlier? So this is also an important question in the literature on democratic backsliding, why resistance actors choose a specific time, a moment to resist. So my focus is going to be mainly I don't know. Now I see. Okay, sorry. I just saw I just couldn't move to the next slide. So I would like to draw attention to certain approaches to party change in the literature. It's from a seminal article on 2005. There are three approaches to why parties change. So there is an endogenous development, which is actually about maturation of the party, that as the party grows older, it takes different forms over time. Just like you start like a mass party, but then as the pressure on elections intensify, you turn into a catch-all party. So all parties are subject to the same type of change according to this approach. Second approach is external adaptation. So what is happening in the external environment of the party matters. So it could be political events, crisis, or it can be a change in the election law. So according to this external environment, they also adapt in different time periods. And the third approach is the genetic structure, which is based on the fact that the way they are born affects parties' development, and they are constrained by their own genetic structure and resistant to transformation as a result. So among these theories, mainly I want to focus on external adaptation and genetic structure. The indigenous development is a bit difficult to apply in the Turkish context. It's a democracy with several interruptions, 4 military interventions, and the recent wave of democratic backsliding under the rule of party. It shows that it has been a very unstable democratic environment, and therefore the indigenous development of parties have been interrupted several times. And parties in Turkey have a tendency to adapt mainly as a result of external events, which are full of scandals, interruptions, as well as their genetic structure. So the genetic features of the CHP, of course, I'm not going to go into the history of CHP. It's a really large body of knowledge, but there are some very key readings from 2000s, and they all mention similar things. So since 12th of September, the military coup, it had a major effect on all parties, including the CHP. So CHP came into existence in 1992 after the ban on the parties was removed, on political parties was removed. And the time it was reborn, it was born in a very depoliticized and disorganized society, and there was a heavy imposition on the parties through the political party laws that created very hierarchic, highly centralized party structures. So the moment it was born in 1992, after the military coup, it was a party an elite-driven party. And the central office, the party headquarters, dominated by the party leader, usually dominated the decision-making processes, candidate selection, and party on the ground, which is composed of activists on the ground, basically was very weak and mostly comprised of local elites and their delegates. Also, I had the chance to visit several party offices at the local level in the past, and most of what local party officials did were, attending funerals or let's say making visits to some other social economic elites, but nothing of the kind of civic activism. So it was far from being a movement party. And ideologically, also, CHP is a party of several ideological conflicts, and in the 1990s and again when it was reborn, there was a clash of these various identities that many of the scholars in this field talk about. But most importantly, of course, it is known as a party of Atatürk. So if you look at how CHP behaved in the past to movements, what do you see? You see a confirmation of this genetic structure. It is a party of rhetoric, parliamentary duty, and elections. So when the Gezi protests happened in 2013, for instance, what the CHP did, how it reacted was mainly supported the protests politically and provided some symbolic participation, like at the leadership level, and criticized. This is very typical of CHP to pay attention to rhetoric, discourse, critical of government's authoritarian approach, especially political violence. And also, it's a party of parliamentary duty. It initiated some parliamentary investigations into excessive use of force. So it is not a movement party. Movement parties tend to have fluid participatory structures, and movement parties rely a lot on extra parliamentary action, like organizing assemblies, local forums, like, for instance, Podemos did in Spain, sit-ins, blockades, claiming streets as political arenas. So nothing of this kind was visible. CHP is usually distant from civic activism and focusing on electoral competition. So this was the genetic structure. In terms of external environment, the CHP transformed, was a movement party in 1970s. First of all, we should not forget that. And I'm mostly focusing on the post-1980 period. But in 70s, it was a movement party under Bülent Ecevit's leadership. And after the post-1980 era, no major event has transformed the CHP into something of that kind that we observed in 70s. Yet there were a few moments that had such potential, that it looked like a movement party, but they were just very momentary events. So the Republican rallies in 2007, and that was the time when the CHP considered Abdullah Gül's candidacy as a threat to secularism. March for Justice in 2019. So that was when the CHP parliamentarian Enis Berberoğlu was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and that was the first time an act of turning into a party defending justice, rights, and democracy. And also Istanbul mayoral elections was a momentum, which we can consider that CHP had shown some movement party related characteristics, because at that time with İmamoğlu's candidacy, and that there was this people. We saw the people in the streets, we saw CHP mobilizing the people. Yet, despite being a part of elections, no particular national election, 2015, 18, 23, has made the effect that 19th of March did on CHP in terms of transforming into a movement.
Pelin, 1 minute left.
Okay. So why is it happening now? I have 2 slides left. So it is the movements usually happen under perceived threat and hope for change. So today, the threat is perceived as quite big. No fair elections in the future. And it shows the same characteristics of the previous moments. This time it is İmamoğlu, the presidential candidate, that is imprisoned. So that time it was Enis Berberoğlu, and that we saw a march for justice. And now we see something much bigger. And also a very important question, by the way, these are hypothetical answers that really require actual research. Why not during 2023 elections? Because it was also supposed to be a transformative election, and hope was there. But this is a question that I also myself am looking for an answer. But perhaps mobilization was not deemed necessary that time. Hope was enough. But so these are still questions. Why not smooth? this is the answer to this question is what I presented as the genetics, the clash between the genetics structure and the external environment. So we see an internal struggle between movement-oriented party officials. The external environment is very conducive to this transformation. But then there are also party officials that follow the CHP's elitist traditional orientation. And so the clear indicator is the speculations regarding the 38th Ordinary Congress of 2023, when some CHP delegates opposed the current leaders' leadership. And so also we see that on one side there are rallies, and the rallies to protect the will of the nation, that there has been 74 of them until now. But then also we see several CHP mayors joining AKP. So this is, in my opinion, these two different stories going at the same time is also demonstrating this struggle between genetic structure and the external environment. Those that are joining the AKP is showing features of parties that rely on favoritism, elitism. These are the mayors that have been appointed, also have been nominated as a candidate by the top leadership. So they are more inclined to, they may be more inclined to move to a party that provides different benefits. So basically, this is all what I want to say. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pelin. It was fascinating. I especially liked the theoretical framework there with the figures and graphs, very clear and very contextual as well. Thank you. So Işık will now walk us through the economic dynamics of Turkish politics.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good night, good evening. I'll be talking about some continuities and some changes, if not a transformation yet. So let me try to start. Yeah. So one of the persistent features of the Turkish economy is its volatility. And volatility in the Turkish economy or of the Turkish economy is very much marked by credibility issues and uncertainties. And this year in 2025, so market-based uncertainties also got intensified by political uncertainty and political risks. So I'll talk about those. So then volatility in general creates a lot of spirals and vicious cycles. And we've had such cycles actually back in the 1990s as well. So then I will make some references to that decade. So this year, particularly this volatility, very high volatility of the Turkish market, also met uncertainties, heightened uncertainties in the global markets. So Trump's trade wars, geopolitical tensions between many actors, but particularly US and China, so then increasing protectionism in general, are quite important risks for an economy like Turkey's that is volatile and highly dependent on global markets. So then I'll talk about political instability, institutional credibility, and sort of rather weak institutional credibility as a feature of the Turkish economy, and also executive discretion as a historical legacy, but very much owned by the executive branch of the government right now. All these combined, of course, confidence is very important in any economy for that matter, just because it shapes expectations, and expectations are primary in market dynamics. So the confidence is very sensitive to political and institutional vulnerabilities in the Turkish market. So I said volatility has been there with us, unfortunately. So this has been a sticky, rather sticky characteristic of the Turkish economy since 1989. What happened in 1989? So capital account liberalization. And capital account liberalization, which Rogic called back in the 1990s, a premature liberalization, exposed the Turkish economy to short-term, especially financial flows, to the Turkish market. So except for a few years in the 2000s, such volatility, I mean 2000s, but after the financial crisis in the 2000s, so then volatility prevailed as a very important feature, and intensified by political and institutional uncertainties and weak credibility, as I mentioned before. So heavy dependence on foreign capital, but particularly short-term financial flows, then makes the Turkish market vulnerable to shocks. And shocks are magnified actually when they meet such volatile sort of dynamics. And between shocks and volatility, there is a sort of two-sided relationship. So volatility heightens the shocks, and shocks make the Turkish economy even more volatile. So in the context of this year, so the political instability and political tensions and the economic shock that they created back in March, April, very much endangered the effectiveness of the anti-inflationary program that the central bank has been implementing. So high inflation is also quite a persistent feature of the Turkish economy. I was going to bring a historical graph actually, but in the last minute I could not. So this starts from the 2000s, 2006 particularly, and comes until 2024. So you will see, so this is the actual annual inflation rate, and it was quite controlled in the 2000s and up until 2016 or so, almost. So all of a sudden, it started again like increasing on the path of like two-digit rates. And all of a sudden in the 2021, 2023 period, when the central bank implemented very unorthodox policies, so that rate almost reached 70%. So here's the discrepancy between the actual rate, which was the rate of inflation, right, aggregate price level increase in those years, and the expected annual rate announced by the central bank in its midterm programs. So then this discrepancy very much endangered the credibility of the central bank. And that credibility, of course, is a very important signal for the market players, for the investors, and for the consumers. And that is, and now the trend actually is quite positive. But now 31%, 32% or so. In November, I think it was 31% in 2025. But then anti-inflationary measures could have made a stronger impact if, let's say, political instability or political tensions of 2025 had not been there. And again, like high inflation rates and accompanied by a prevalent distrust in the central bank, as I said, like the credibility of the central bank had been endangered already. And since 2020, this group of independent economists, inflation research group, they call themselves, gather data and they calculate their own inflation rates because they do not trust the credibility of the data gathered and announced publicly by the Turkish Statistical Institute. And now the peak year, so in December 2023, so 65% inflation rate, annual inflation rate announced by official statistics of Turkish Statistical Institute, and so almost doubled the rate of, the rate was the rate declared by this ENAC inflation research group. So this is another layer of credibility, let's say, concerns. So weak credibility. So this discrepancy between projected and actual rates of inflation, so announced by the Central Bank of Turkey, endangers its credibility. And when it meets with political instability, so then inflation expectations even get much higher. So investor confidence and consumer confidence and the market dynamics are suppressed, and the risk premium, political risk premium of the Turkish economy increases substantially. And then what comes out of this, I mean, almost sort of like a chain process, is dollarization, because citizens do not have confidence in Turkish lira. So dollarization process, persistent high inflation, and depreciation, further depreciation of currency. And further depreciation of currency, and all this process almost make the Turkish economy even more dependent on short-term capital flows. And the central bank then intervenes in the foreign exchange markets, and trade deficit that Turkey suffers, and it increased actually in the recent past, so enhances the dependency of the Turkish economy on the capital flows, foreign capital flows as well. So out of all these processes, we have, again, heightened volatility. So then this is one of the spirals that I was referring to in the beginning of my talk. So international trade. So Turkey is very much dependent on global markets and for trade purposes as well. So then it's not one positive trend of the last maybe 10, 15 years is that the dependence, Turkey's very high, heavy dependence on the European Union diminished a bit. So it used to be 55% of the Turkish exports going to the European Union. Now it's about 41%. So, and no single economy constitutes a very big share in the exports. So Germany is the largest partner, according to Turkstat again. So China is the largest partner with respect to imports. But still, so this 40% going to the European markets might be quite tricky for the near future, because now protectionism that started not only in the United States, but also sort of this hidden protectionism that is often referred to as such, hidden protectionism by CBAM, right? So then carbon border adjustment mechanism will affect the Turkish exports very much. So then this trade deficit, and which increases the vulnerabilities, will become a more important of a dynamic in the near future.
1 minute left, Işık.
Okay. So one positive thing in this year may be, so this like declining inflation rate, as I said, but this despite the shocks, despite big shocks. And in 2023, the central bank had shifted already from a very unorthodox stance to an orthodox stance, and it started using macroprudential tools, so a lot of anti-inflationary instruments, interventions in the foreign exchange markets, promoting liraization and discouraging dollarization processes. And as we speak today, so policy rates this morning actually dropped. In Turkey by the Central Bank of Turkey. And that, I mean, dropped from 39.5% to 38%. So this was more than expected. So the markets expected 100 points of a decline, but the decline came out as 150 points. So this is following the global trends. So the reductions of the interest rates by the European Central Bank, and so again, as we speak, yesterday, so the Fed decreased the interest rates again. This is following those trends, and it's still very high, and it's still is one of the mechanisms to attract short-term capital flows, and Turkey is actually competing with Argentina's of the world, unfortunately, to just attract this like short-term flows, and because it has very high. I mean, the Turkish lira has very high yield. Anyhow, I will stop here, and so I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Işık, and thank you to all of the speakers. I think your task was much more difficult than I initially thought. Listening to you, I realized, how difficult a task I gave you. Both, summarize 2025 and then give some historical background and talk also about the future. I mean, it was a bit too much now, I realize, but you've done all very good, obviously, and as expected. So we have actually 15 questions. So I will prioritize questions from the audience, and we'll try to read out a few questions so that we can have a first round of Q&A. If the audience has other questions, they can also post their questions in the Q&A. I cannot promise that we will go through all of the questions, but we will definitely do our best. And I will try to prioritize students in the first round. And so bear with me as I read the questions. To the speakers, they can also, I think, look at the questions if they think that would help to see, whose question I'm reading. So the first question is from Aksel Zekeriya Bulut. Aksel is a political economy, master's political economy student at LSE. And the question is more in general to all of the speakers, and how you perceive the plausibility of Türkiye being able to sustain a regime similar to Russia, which undeniably perhaps Erdogan and his allies' end goal is, according to Aksel. So given Turkey's lack of natural resources or other means of production to sustain the economy, how plausible is it? Perhaps to ask the question to consolidate the current regime in Turkey. So that's one question. I mean, whoever wants to answer it can answer it, but I'm going to pose more questions. A question from Roger Higginson, who's a research associate at the University of Sussex, UK. This is a question about Turkey's policies towards Syria's new government. So this was a question that kind of Ezra posed towards the end of her intervention as well. So, but both Buğra and Ezra can perhaps answer this question in terms of Turkey's approach to Syria. So let me see. There is Zeynep Kösemen, who is an LSE student. And Zeynep is asking, how would you compare the genetic structure of CHP? This is a question for Pelin. How would you compare the genetic structure of CHP to the current... May I just ask in the background, to the Contemporary Turkish Studies team not to change the position of the questions until I read them, because then the list gets changed and I cannot follow the question. So just wait until I read the questions and then you can move them to the answered box. Apologies for that. So, okay, so I was reading Zeynep's question. How would you compare the genetic structure of CHP to the current leading parties in the US? And how do you think this genetic difference leads to difference in their actions and perceptions via the general public? Interesting question, a comparative question, perhaps not even if the US, maybe European parties. Pelin, you can provide more background. Okay, I will read two more questions. Massimo D'Angelo, thanks for this brilliant session. Massimo is a recent PhD, actually, and currently a lecturer at the University of Greenwich. So he has two questions. The first is for Buğra. So I have the impression, where Massimo says, I have the impression that this increasing transactionalization of relations with the West is proving highly beneficial for Turkey in terms of enhancing its centrality across multiple geopolitical arenas. So in this sense, strategic autonomy appears far more advantageous for the country than any formal affiliation. What are your thoughts on this? And then the second question is for Pelin. In the process of change within the CHP, how has the party's pro-European affiliation evolved, if it has evolved at all? And then the final question that I'm read for this round, but we'll definitely have another round, is from Nilüfer, who is a PhD student at LSE, at the European Institute. This is Nilüfer Güneş. Thank you for this excellent panel and all the presentations. I have a question on a slightly different note, perhaps either for Buğra or Pelin. How can we make sense of Turkey's recent hosting of the Pope in terms of its foreign policy strategy, identity projection, or the AKP's domestic political agenda? Certainly, this was a much highlighted and had a lot of news coverage in Turkey. So what does this signify is the question. Although some questions were posed to certain speakers, feel free to answer any question that you would like to answer in this round. So Buğra, shall we start with you?
Okay, let me start with the strategic autonomy question. So thank you very much. I think, yeah, that's a very commonly used concept, the idea of strategic autonomy, but it also depends on how one defines strategic autonomy. It does create opportunities. I think flexibility in terms of how you engage with global powers, diversity, you can mediate, interbloc diplomacy. But I think the trade-offs are not sufficiently analyzed here. So there's a sense of like Turkey can win in the West and then win in the East, but what exactly is the trade-off of this policy? So maybe creating new dependencies on non-Western global powers, that might be one concern. Maybe reputational costs, credibility among Western powers, maybe economic costs, because it's still EU is still a primary economic partner of the European Union. So engagement with non-Western powers isn't really likely to replace that in the near future. And hedging sometimes can also be seen as this unpredictable move. So I think while it does create these opportunities, and the world itself, I think, is going towards more like transactionalism, overall. But I think we should also consider like what exactly is Turkey losing and what are the trade-offs here.
Sorry, great, thank you. Did you want to answer any other questions? There was a question on Syria.
I can maybe broadly talk about Syria as well. I think Turkey, the official, like it recognizes Damascus as a legitimate actor. It reopened its embassy in Damascus, and I think there is redevelopment economic opportunities there. So cooperation on the basis of security, border security is one priority of Turkey. But also their territory is under effective Turkish control. So that's going to come up in the future as to how is it going to be resolved, or what exactly is the political arrangement going to look like inside Syria as well. I think Turkey tries to play a major role in post-war reconstruction of Syria economically, but also politically. So I think that's an area that we can watch for in the coming year.
Okay, great, Buğra. Thank you very much. Esra.
Okay, let me actually start with this question by William Kissane, asking if what the PKK did and if they decided to stop their campaign without being offered anything in return. Well, I mean, most of the negotiations, the government even doesn't want to use the term negotiation, but most of the interactions or conversations, let's say, take place with Abdullah Öcalan, who is in İmralı, in prison, and he's been there for a very long time. So far, with his calls, actually, the PKK, the armed group, pretty much followed his orders and took mostly unilateral steps so far. So the last being, I don't exactly remember, but sometime in October, they decided to, withdraw most of their people sort of in an area that will not allow any military clashes with the Turkish security forces. So it's been unilateral moves. And there in July also there has been a symbolic sort of disarmament ceremony that took place in Kurdistan, the Iraqi Kurdistan region. 20 PKK members sort of came. People from Turkey were invited to the ceremony as well, where they burned their weapons and and then left. So it was a symbolic disarmament ceremony, but it was actually an important turning point, which was then again, as I said, in October, followed by the withdrawal of PKK, most PKK fighters outside. So it's been unilateral steps, but in the last several weeks, actually, we are hearing a lot of statements from high-level PKK armed group, PKK members, saying that actually Öcalan's freedom would be a condition. Öcalan actually coming out of the prison would be a condition for full disarmament. We didn't actually hear these kinds of statements earlier in the process. So it's been quite remarkable in that sense. I think this is I see these kinds of statements somehow like positioning vis-a-vis the discussions taking place in the parliament with regard to what kind of law legislation will follow about the return of some of the ex-combatants and what will be the conditions of those return or amnesty. So I think I see these statements coming out right now as somehow in related to the process going on around the law.
May I suggest that we try to answer questions more quickly because we have only 15 minutes left? And
Yeah.
I'm also fully aware of the fact that Esra, you are in the Turkish time zone, so you don't want to be with us until midnight, I assume.
That's all I'm going to
Okay,
say.
great. Thank you very much. Pelin?
Thank you. Okay, I will start with the question on the genetic structure and this comparative question. Also, it also depends on the time and whether it's a context of democratic backsliding or whether it's a context of stability. But the question focuses more on genetics. The parties in the US, I'm not an expert on parties in the US, but during election times, as much as I was able to follow, there is a really important engagement as activism related processes. Like the party activists were quiet. They spent a lot of time campaigning during elections. In Turkey, like the genetic structure of the CHP, and we said it's elitist, parliamentary, duty-oriented. We don't see much activism during election times. People are actually more election-oriented, and they rather expect things from the party leadership. To criticize the government rhetorically, to like even now when we look at what's happening, uh, like the participation level in protests kind of declined, and seems to be some expectation from the party leader to show this heroism and save the country from the AKP. So there is like people also have been historically more election oriented because parties have been very elite oriented structures and distant from the society. Whereas in a country like US, as I mentioned, I see more activism during campaigning processes, door to door canvassing, and like calling, this is quiet. I think a big difference. When it comes to this CHP's pro-European affiliation, I would say there is some slight change that it is quite the link I can observe is a bit, but not too much. Uh, uh, Maybe it is more dense right now. CHP is a member of the Party of European Socialists, and the Party of European Socialists have been very vocal to support CHP, and it sees CHP as an important political actor that is trying to save Turkish democracy. So the link between the European Socialists and CHP has improved since then. Also, the members of the European Parliament, like Ekrem İmamoğlu, the jailed mayor, had a very strong link with European actors, like members of the parliament, mayors of capitals. So the mayors of several European capitals came to Istanbul in support for him. So there is such a link that is, I would say, improving. When it comes to this is the last, there was a question on the Pope. Well, I did not see much reaction or statement from the CHP side on the Pope, but usually when it comes to religion and foreign policy, all parties, not just the CHP, they have a focus on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So they expect the Catholic world to respect what is going on in Palestine and show sensitivity toward this issue. So in general, I think there is a unity on this topic across all parties, opposition and government. This is very interesting to me as well, that among all issues, this is the issue where we see some overlap. And so in that sense, this is how they approach to Pope, like to show some sensitivity on the topic of Israel and Palestine. I will stop here.
Great. Işık, if we skipped you in this round, I will give you the first floor in the second round, if I may, because I'm very conscious of the time. So I did my best in grouping the questions together, but what I realized is actually there are a lot of questions about the future. So I think I will ask all of you to talk a little bit about what you expect for 2026 or until 2028, when Turkey is supposed to have general elections. For example, to Işık, Uğurcan Çelik, who's a PhD student, Kutup Aytekin, who is a researcher at EUI, is asking to Işık whether Turkish economy is actually sustainable. I'm summarizing the questions here as much as I can to go as fast as I can, so I apologize for that. But there are also questions about Erdogan's intentions or, what might happen to Turkish politics. For example, William Hale, who's in the audience, and I'm sure every one of you knows who William Hale is, needs no introduction. All of our professors have been actually taught by William Hale in a way. So William Hale is asking what are Erdogan's or AKP's aim in the peace process? So do we know at least what the aims of the AKP is? Axel is asking whether there's a chance for the AKP to call for early elections. Mark Lees, who's a PhD student at Swansea, is asking what would happen after Erdogan, actually. So does Turkey have a plan B after Erdogan? So these are all, politically aimed questions, let's put it that way, in terms of like projecting into the future. And you can choose, obviously, in which way you want to answer. And then there are also questions in foreign policy and in the organization of rallies. For example, Begum Zorlu, who is a lecturer at Cities, is asking whether the CHP can keep the momentum with the rallies, for example, and mobilization. And then there is a question with regards to the maneuver of Turkey in foreign policy and its hedging policy since Trump came to power. So in terms of foreign policy, is Turkey, like all perhaps countries, more restricted now? So I will leave you with these questions again to select whichever you want, and we will try to wrap up this session in 10 minutes. So Işık, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so let me be very quick. I've read the question actually. Thanks for that. So my guesstimate is that both the central bank and the government, the executive interference is there. And in other policies as well, not only in monetary policy but also in fiscal policy, I think they will keep juggling. They will keep juggling a lot of instruments altogether. So it's quite a difficult, challenging situation right now. But Turkey keeps being a very attractive market because of the very high yield of Turkish lira. So that got, of course, affected by the political crisis in 2025. But then again, they are very much dependent on the flow of that money. But belt tightening policies are very complex because public spending will be high because of upcoming electoral cycle. Despite the continuing policy of the central bank, so the consistency of the measures may not be sustained as such. So we will get to see.
Great. Thank you very much, Işık. Maybe we do a reverse run now. Pelin, do you want to answer any of the questions?
Can CHP keep the momentum was the question. It's very difficult.
Yeah, one of the questions.
Well, it depends on whether it will be able to be creative in terms of movement tactics. Like so far, some of the tactics that it introduced in the beginning, I see that they are not that visible anymore. For instance, boycott, economic boycott. I thought that was a quite innovative one. I would say that not just rallies. If you look at the movement literature, how movements keep their momentum is really usually based on creativity, getting attention through being active all the time, not just rallies, sit-ins, blockades. So there are many different ways to keep it alive. So, well, the CHP, as I said, it was not a movement party. Whether is it able to going to do that? Maybe if it learns how to do it over time. Also looking at these transnational examples, like what's Serbian activists in Serbia and Georgia, it requires learning. So that's my answer to that.
Great.
I think
Thank you
that
very
was
much.
one question that you asked. So
thank you. That was the only question that was directly specified. That specified you. But yeah, thanks. Thank you very much. Esra?
Okay. Let me say. First of all, I mean, in terms of a lot of things can happen in the next year, in terms of the peace process or the next 2 years. First of all, it's not going to be easy, or it's not going to be a quick fix. This process will take months, years. So and step by step, and maybe 2 steps ahead, 1 step back. So it's how all peace processes proceed, and I think it will be the same for this one. The other thing that somebody asked a question about Syria. I think what will happen in Syria in terms of there was an agreement between the SDF and the Syrian government with regards to the integration of SDF into the Syrian army. That will be one of the key issues that will also influence and affect how the peace process evolves in Turkey. And finally, there is a question from William Hale about the constitution. Let me answer that quickly. Different from the previous peace process between 2013 and 15, in this one, they strictly decided to separate the disarmament reintegration process from any constitutional process. So right now, there's not much talk of a new constitution, although at some point, I think it will be an important issue that will be coming up in the next year, especially once the disarmament and reintegration process moves forward. The current commission's task is to just work on the disarmament and reintegration, not the constitution. And the commission made it very clear in the beginning that this commission is not going to discuss anything about the constitution. This was one of the conditions of CHP for joining the commission, actually. So I think that discussion, the constitution issue, will come up in the next year or maybe 2 years, but not immediately. At least I don't see it emerging as an issue within in the next 6 months or so, but we'll see.
Okay, great, thank you. Buğra?
I'll address the more conceptual question about middle powers and whether there is less space for hedging policies for middle powers under the second Trump presidency, whether I would agree with that. I would actually say that there's more space for middle powers to exert influence because of the growing systemic uncertainty. The recent U.S. national security strategy, the U.S. is recalibrating its global posture, shift from global leadership. It actually, I would say, it invites middle power engagement in areas where you see a certain degree of withdrawal of the US influence, so an increasing non-Western centers of gravity. So I think that those are all conditions that can lead to greater exercise of agency through regional politics, regional ownership or leadership of specific issue areas like perhaps climate change, mediation, and so on. So I think it enlarges the choice set of middle powers, but also it creates a context, I think, where they can exercise or they can try to become leaders in certain areas. And I'm also gonna say a few things about 2026. I think this systemic kind of uncertainty, the Russian threat, all led to a reconsideration of defense cooperation, security cooperation in Europe. So I think it's going to be interesting in 2026 to see how Turkey fits into that discussion, whether it's about Gaza or Turkey's role in that region or in Ukraine. So I think that is going, for me, I think that's an interesting area to watch in 2026, I would say.
Excellent. Thank you very much. There were some very interesting questions in the Q&A box, but we couldn't, we don't have any time left. But Of course, if you have any specific questions, you can reach out to the speakers via email, and perhaps if in their very busy schedules they have time, they might be able to answer the questions. So thank you very much to everyone who joined us today. If you enjoyed this event, please visit the Contemporary Turkish Studies website for the recordings of past events, and you can also follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram, and LinkedIn for announcements of future events, and also you can sign up for our email list on our website. I would like to thank Burra Süsler, Esra Çuhadar, Pelin Ayhan Musil, and Işık Özel for being with us today. It is much appreciated. I would like to also thank Arzu Kırcal Şahin, who has been running the technical side of things tonight. So although we couldn't see her face, she's been doing everything in the background, so thanks. And finally, thank you to all of you who joined us from wherever you were, and also asked wonderful questions, making this a much more engaging panel. It was a pleasure listening to the speakers, and we hope everyone has a happy new year. Goodbye.